The old pickup truck wheezed and coughed as it made its way down the winding country road. Behind the wheel, Robert sat hunched over, his calloused hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles had turned white. The rain hammered against the windshield, and the wipers squeaked with each pass, barely keeping up with the downpour. 18 months? That's how long it had been since his world fell apart. 18 months since he'd held his wife's hand in that sterile hospital room, watching her slip away after a brief but brutal fight with cancer. 18 months of trying to keep his head above water and failing miserably. The small farm that had once been his pride and joy now looked like a ghost town. Weeds grew tall between the corn rows, and the barn roof leaked so badly that puddles formed on the concrete floor every time it rained. The vegetable garden his wife had lovingly tended was now just a patch of brown earth, cracked and forgotten. Robert pulled into his driveway and sat for a moment, staring at the stack of bills. On his dashboard, electric company final notice, bank mortgage, payment overdue. His son's school, lunch money account empty. The numbers blurred together, but he knew them by heart. 15,000 in debt and counting. He'd spent the afternoon in town, walking from store to store, asking if anyone needed help. The hardware store didn't need another clerk. The diner already had enough waiters. Even the gas station turned him away, saying they were cutting hours, not adding them. Each rejection felt like another nail in his coffin. The front door creaked as he pushed it open. The house was quiet. Too quiet. His two kids, Lucy and Jake, were probably in their rooms doing homework, or at least pretending to. He'd learned to keep out of his way when he came home looking defeated. The kitchen table was covered with more bills, school papers that needed signing, and a letter from his mother-in-law that he hadn't opened yet. He knew what it said. She'd been making threats for months now, saying the children would be better off with her in the city, saying he couldn't take care of them properly. Maybe she was right. Lucy appeared in the doorway, her 8-year-old face serious beyond her. "Yours, Dad, there's no milk for cereal tomorrow?" Robert's heart sank. He'd forgotten to buy groceries again. "I'll get some in the morning, sweetheart. That's what you said yesterday." Her voice was small, but the disappointment was clear. He knelt down and pulled her into a hug. She felt so small, so fragile. "I'm sorry, Lucy. I'm trying my best." He hugged him back, but he could feel her holding something back. The easy affection she used to show him was gone, replaced by careful distance. It broke his heart. Jake, his 6-year-old, peeked around the corner. His clothes were wrinkled, and his hair needed cutting. When was the last time Robert had given him a proper bath? When was the last time he'd read him a bedtime story? "I made a picture at school," Jake said quietly, holding up a drawing of stick figures. "It's our family." In the drawing there were 4 people, 2 adults and 2 children. The woman figure had wings and was floating above the other 3. His wife was still part of their family in Jake's mind, watching over them from somewhere. Up there. Robert's throat tightened. "It's beautiful, buddy. Let's put it on the refrigerator." But as he walked to the kitchen, he noticed how empty the refrigerator was. A half-empty jar of peanut butter, some wilted lettuce, and a carton of orange juice that had probably gone bad. This wasn't the life he'd planned for his children. The phone rang, cutting through the silence like a knife. Robert hesitated before answering, knowing it was probably another bill collector. "Hello, Robert. It's Margaret." "Duh." His mother-in-law's voice was stern, businesslike. "We need to talk." "Margaret, I told you, those children need stability. They need proper meals, clean clothes, and someone who can actually take care of them. You're drowning, and you're taking them down with you." Robert sank into a kitchen chair. "I'm doing everything I can." "No, you're not. You're wallowing in self-pity while those babies suffer." "I've spoken to a lawyer, can file for custody. And honestly, Robert, what judge wouldn't side with me? Look at your situation." The words hit him like physical blows. "You can't take my children." "I don't want to, but I will if I have to. Get your act together or I'll have no choice." The line went dead. Robert stared at the phone, his hands shaking. She was right, and that's what made it so much worse. He was failing at the one thing that mattered most. He walked to the living room where his wife's picture still sat on the mantel. She was smiling, holding both kids when they were younger. Back when everything made sense. When he knew how to be a father, a husband, a man. "I don't know what to do," he whispered to the photograph. "I don't know how to do this without you." The house felt like it was closing in on him. The walls seemed to press closer with each passing day, filled with memories of better times. Couch, where they used to watch movies together. The kitchen table where they'd planned their future. The bedroom where they'd whispered their dreams to each other in the dark. Everything reminded him of what he'd lost. He couldn't escape it. Lucy appeared again, this time with a math worksheet. "Dad, I need help with my homework." Robert looked at the paper, but the numbers seemed to swim before his eyes. It's a simple addition and subtraction that should have been easy, but his mind felt clouded, heavy. "Can you ask your teacher tomorrow?" he said, immediately hating himself for the words. Lucy's face fell. "Okay." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Dad, are you going to be okay?" The question came from an 8-year-old who shouldn't have to worry about such things. Robert forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. Everything's going to be fine." But as she walked away, he knew she didn't believe him. Kids were smart that way. They could sense when the adults in their lives were falling apart. Later that evening, after putting the kids to bed with promises he wasn't sure he could keep, Robert sat on his front porch despite the rain. The storm was getting worse, and he should have gone inside, but something kept him there. Maybe it was the noise of the rain that drowned out his thoughts. Or maybe he just needed to feel something other than the numbness that had taken over. His life, his neighbors' lights were on across the field, normal people living normal lives, coming home to warm dinners and happy families, everything he used to have and didn't know how to get back. The truck keys felt heavy in his pocket. He'd been driving around a lot lately, sometimes with no destination in mind. Just moving seemed better than sitting still with his thoughts. Tonight felt like one of those nights. He stood up, rain immediately soaking through his thin jacket, and walked toward the truck. Maybe a drive would clear his head. Maybe he'd find some answers on the empty roads that stretched through the Kentucky countryside as he started the engine. He had no idea that this particular drive would change everything. That in just a few miles he'd encounter someone who would help him remember that even in the darkest times, hope could appear when you least expected it. The rain pounded harder against the windshield as Robert drove through the empty country roads. His headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the twisted branches of old oak trees that bent and swayed in the storm. He'd been driving for almost an hour now, with no real destination in mind. Sometimes the motion helped quiet the chaos in his head. The old highway stretched ahead of him, lonely and forgotten. Most people took the interstate now, leaving these back roads to farmers, and folks who preferred the slower pace. Tonight, Robert was grateful for the solitude. He needed time to think, to figure out how he was going to turn his life around before it was too late. As he rounded a sharp curve near Miller's Creek, his headlights caught something that made him slow down. There, huddled under the broken shelter of an old bus stop, was a figure in white. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Who would be out here in this weather, specially dressed in what looked like ... Robert squinted through the rain-streaked glass. It was a woman, and she was wearing what appeared to be a wedding dress. But it wasn't the pristine white gown you'd see in magazines. This dress was torn and muddy, clinging to her shivering frame like a wet shroud. He pulled over and rolled down his window, immediately feeling the cold rain hit his face. "Miss, are you okay?" The woman looked up, and even in the dim light, Robert could see the fear in her eyes. She was young, maybe in her 30s, with dark hair plastered to her head and mascara streaked down her cheeks. Pursed to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her together. I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. Her accent was soft, musical. "I don't want to bother anyone." "You're not bothering anyone," Robert said, putting the truck in park. "But you're going to freeze out here. Where are you trying to go?" The woman hesitated, looking down at her ruined dress. "The women's shelter in Millfield." "But I don't have money for another bus ticket." Millfield was 3 counties over, at least a 2-hour drive in good weather. In this storm, it would take much longer. Robert got out of the truck, not caring. that he was getting soaked. Up close, he could see that the woman was exhausted, probably hadn't eaten in hours. "I'm Robert," he said gently. "What's your name?" "Maria," she whispered. "Maria Santos." "Well, Maria, you can't stay out here. Let me give you a ride." She shook her head quickly. "Oh, I couldn't. I don't know you, and you don't know me." Robert almost smiled at that. This tiny woman, shivering in a torn wedding dress, worried that she might be dangerous to him. "I think I can take my chances. Come on, get in the truck. We'll figure out the rest." Maria looked at him for a long moment, studying his face. Whatever. She saw there must have convinced her, because she slowly stood up. Robert opened the passenger door and helped her climb in, noticing how her hands shook as she buckled her seatbelt. He turned up the heat and grabbed an old work jacket from behind. His seat. "Here, put this on. You're soaked to the bone." As they drove, Maria's story began to unfold in bits and pieces. She spoke quietly, often switching between English and Spanish when she got emotional. Robert didn't understand all the Spanish words, but the pain in her voice was universal. She'd been working as a seamstress in Louisville for the past 3 years, sending most of her money back to her sick mother in Mexico. The job wasn't much, but it was honest work, and she was good with her hands. Her boss, Mr. Chen, ran a small tailoring shop and treated her fairly, but Mr. Chen had a son, David, who'd taken an interest in Maria that went far beyond appropriate. At first, it was just comments about how pretty she looked, compliments that made her uncomfortable but seemed harmless enough. Then he started showing up at her apartment, uninvited, bringing gifts she didn't want, and asking her out on dates she had no interest in. "I told him no so many times," Maria said, staring out at the dark fields rushing past. "But he wouldn't listen. He said I was just playing hard to get." When David's advances became more aggressive, Maria had tried to talk to Mr. Chen about it, but David was his only son, his pride and joy. Instead of addressing the problem, Mr. Chen had suggested that maybe Maria was encouraging David's attention. Maybe she should consider herself lucky that such a successful young man was interested in her. "Successful," Maria said with a bitter laugh. "He lived in his father's basement and couldn't hold a job for more than a month. But because he was American, because he was the boss's son, his word meant more than mine." Things had escalated quickly after that. David had started making threats, saying he could get her fired, could make sure she never worked in Louisville again. He knew her immigration status was complicated, and he used that against her. "He said he could help me get my papers in order," Maria continued. "All I had to do was marry him. He made it sound like a business arrangement at first, but I could. See the way he looked at me? I knew it wouldn't stay business for long." Robert's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He'd heard stories like this before, seen how some men took advantage of women who had nowhere else to turn. It made his stomach turn. When Maria continued to refuse, David had gotten his father involved. Suddenly, Maria's hours were cut. Her pay was docked for minor mistakes, and the working conditions became unbearable. Other employees, sensing which way the wind was blowing, started treating her differently too. "I needed the job," Maria said simply. "My mother's medicine is expensive, and I'm all she has. So when David said he would hurt my mother if I didn't agree to marry him, I ran out of choices." Oh. The wedding had been planned quickly, a small ceremony at the courthouse with just a few witnesses. Maria had hoped that once they were married, David would be satisfied and leave her alone. But the night before the wedding, he'd made it clear that he expected much more from their arrangement than she was willing to give. "He drank too much at the rehearsal dinner," Maria said, her voice getting smaller. "He started talking about our wedding night, about what he was going to do to me. The way he said it, I knew I couldn't go through with it." She'd waited until everyone was asleep, then slipped out of the hotel in her wedding dress. It was the only decent outfit she owned, and she'd planned to wear it to her new life. Instead, it became her escape outfit. "I took a bus as far as my money would take me," she said. "I thought maybe I could walk the rest of the way to the shelter, but then the storm started." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the steady rhythm of the wipers and the rain drumming on the roof. Robert found himself thinking about courage, about the kind of strength it took to walk away from everything you knew, even when that everything was hurting you. "You did the right thing," he said finally. running away. That took guts. Maria looked at him with surprise. My grandmother would say I brought shame on our family. That a woman should make the best of whatever situation she finds herself in. Your grandmother never had to deal with someone like David, Robert said firmly. Sometimes running away is the bravest thing you can do. As they approached the turnoff for Millfield, Robert found himself slowing down. Something about sending this woman to a shelter in the middle of the night didn't sit right with him. She'd been through enough for one day. Robert found himself pulling into his own driveway instead of continuing toward Millfield. The decision surprised even him, but something deep in his gut told him it was right. Maria looked confused as the truck came to a stop in front of the small farmhouse. "This isn't the shelter," she said quietly, a hint of worry creeping into her voice. "No, it's not," Robert said, turning off the engine. "Look, it's past midnight. You're exhausted, and that shelter is still 2 hours away in. This storm? My kids are asleep upstairs, and I've got a couch you can sleep on tonight. In the morning, when the weather clears up, I'll drive you wherever you need to go." Maria stared at the house through the rain-streaked windshield. It was small and modest, with a wraparound porch and flower boxes that had seen better days. Warm yellow light glowed from one of the downstairs windows. "I can't impose on your family like that," she said. "Your wife probably wouldn't appreciate a stranger showing up in the middle of the night." Robert's throat tightened. "There's no wife. It's just me and my 2 kids." He paused, then added quietly, "My wife passed away about 1.5 years ago." The simple words hung in the air between them. Maria turned to look at him, and for the first time that night, her expression softened with something other than fear or sadness. "I'm sorry," she said. "That must be very hard." "Some days are better than others," Robert said, which was the most honest thing he'd said about his grief in months. "Come on, let's get you inside before you catch pneumonia." The house was quiet as they entered through the kitchen door. Robert grabbed a clean towel from the laundry basket and handed it to Maria, who was still shivering despite the jacket he'd given her. "The bathroom's down the hall if you want to clean up," he said. "I'll see if I can find you some dry clothes." While Maria was in the bathroom, Robert went upstairs and quietly checked on his children. Lucy was curled up with her stuffed rabbit, and Jake had kicked off his covers as usual. Robert tucked him back in, then went to the closet where his wife's clothes still hung. It's untouched for 18 months. His hand hesitated on the door handle. He hadn't been able to bring himself to pack away her things yet. Every time he tried, the grief would hit him like a physical weight. But looking at Maria downstairs, soaked and scared, he knew his wife would have wanted him to help. He pulled out a simple blue sweater and a pair of jeans, then added some socks and undergarments. That still had the tags on them. His wife had always been buying clothes for special occasions that never came. When he came back downstairs, Maria was sitting on the couch, looking small and lost in his oversized work jacket. Her hair was damp but clean, and she'd managed to wipe away most of the smeared makeup. "These should fit," Robert said, setting the clothes beside her. "They belonged to my wife. She was about your size." Maria touched the soft wool of the sweater with gentle fingers. "Are you sure? These look expensive." She would have wanted someone to get use out of them, Robert said, and realized he meant it. "I'll make up the couch for you. Are you hungry? I think I've got some soup in the pantry." As Maria changed clothes in the bathroom, Robert heated up a can of chicken soup and made some toast. It wasn't much, but it was warm and filling. When she emerged wearing his wife's clothes, something shifted in the atmosphere of the house. For the first time in months, it felt less empty. They sat at the kitchen table, Maria eating slowly while Robert nursed a cup of coffee. The rain continued to pound against the windows, but inside, the house felt safe and warm. "Tell me about your children," Maria said between spoonfuls of soup. Robert's face lit up in a way it hadn't in a long time. "Lucy's 8, smart as a whip, but stubborn as a mule. She gets that from her mother. And Jake's 6 sweet kid, loves trucks and dinosaurs and anything that makes noise. They must miss their mother terribly. Yeah, they do. We all do." Robert stared into his coffee cup. "I've been doing a pretty lousy job of taking care of them lately. My mother-in-law thinks they'd be better off with her in the city." Maria looked up sharply. "Do you think that's true?" "I don't know anymore," Robert admitted. I can barely keep food on the table. Lucy's been wearing the same 3 outfits to school for weeks because I forgot to do laundry. Jake cries for his mom every night, and I don't know how to comfort him because I'm crying for her too. The honesty surprised him. He hadn't talked to anyone about his struggles this openly, not even the grief counselor the church had recommended. Grief makes everything harder, Maria said softly. When my father died, my mother couldn't get out of bed for months. I was only 12, so I had to take care of my little brothers. I thought she didn't love us anymore because she was so sad all the time. What changed? Time, mostly. And realizing that she was doing the best she could with a broken heart, sometimes, that's all we can do. They talked until the early hours of the morning, sharing stories about loss and struggle, about the weight of responsibility and the fear of failing the people you love most. For Robert, it was the first real conversation he'd had with another adult in months that wasn't about bills or problems or his inadequacies as a father. As the storm finally began to calm outside, Robert found himself looking at Maria differently. Here was a woman who had faced impossible choices and had the courage to walk away from a life that would have destroyed her. She'd left everything behind with nothing but the clothes on her back. Yet she was sitting in his kitchen, offering him comfort and understanding. "Maria," he said suddenly, the words coming out before he could stop them. "What if you didn't go to the shelter?" She looked at him with confusion. "What do you mean?" Robert's heart was racing, but the idea that had been forming in his mind felt surprisingly right. "What if you stayed here with us, Robert?" "I can't hear me out," he said, leaning forward. "You need a place to stay, and I need help with the kids. You said you were good with sewing, right? Maybe you could do alterations for people in town. There's not much work around here, but there's enough to get by." Maria stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You're talking about me living in your house? With your children? You barely know me." "I know enough," Robert said firmly. "I know you're brave enough to walk away from a bad situation. I know you're kind enough to listen to a stranger's problems. I know you care about family because you were willing to sacrifice everything for your mother. But what would people think? A man and woman living together, unmarried, in a small town like this?" The solution came to Robert like a lightning bolt, so sudden and clear that it took his breath away. "Then we get married." The words hung in the air like something solid. Maria's spoon clattered against her bowl. "Married," she whispered. "Think about it," Robert said, his voice gaining strength as the idea took shape. "You need legal protection, a way to stay in the country safely. I need help with my kids, someone who understands what it's like to struggle. We could help each other." Maria was shaking her head slowly. "Robert, marriage isn't something you do just to solve problems. What about love?" "What about it?" Robert asked gently. "My heart is broken, Maria. I loved my wife with everything I had, and when she died, that part of me died too. I'm not looking for romance or passion. I'm looking for partnership, for someone who can help me be a better father to my children. And what do I get out of this crazy arrangement? Safety, stability, a chance to build a life instead of just surviving day to day. My kids need a mother figure, and from what I've seen tonight, you'd be good at that." Maria was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands folded in her lap. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to show through the clouds. "This is insane," she finally said. Maybe Robert agreed. But sometimes insane is exactly what life calls for. 3 days later, Robert found himself standing in the courthouse wearing his only good shirt, which still smelled faintly of mothballs. Beside him, Maria wore a simple yellow dress they'd bought at the thrift store in town. It wasn't the wedding either of them had ever imagined, but then again, nothing about their situation was ordinary. The clerk, Mrs. Henderson, had raised an eyebrow when they'd come in to apply for the marriage license. She'd known Robert since he was a boy, and seeing him with a woman she'd never met before had clearly surprised her. But she'd processed their paperwork without asking too many questions, though Robert could see the curiosity burning in her eyes. "Do you, Robert James Miller, take Maria Elena Santos to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The justice of the peace spoke in a monotone voice, like he'd performed this ceremony 1,000 times before. I do, Robert said, his voice steadier than he felt. And do you, Maria Elena Santos, take Robert James Miller to be your lawfully wedded husband? Maria looked at Robert for a moment, her dark eyes searching his face. They'd spent the last 2 days talking through every detail of their arrangement, making sure they both understood what they were getting into. It wasn't love, but it was something solid, something they could build on. I do, she said softly. The rings were simple gold bands from the jewelry store downtown. Nothing fancy, but they looked right on their fingers. When the justice of the peace pronounced them husband and wife, Robert felt something shift inside him. Not love, not yet, but a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in months. Lucy and Jake had been confused at first when Robert explained that Maria would be staying with them permanently. Jake, being 6, had adapted quickly. He'd taken to following Maria around the house like a puppy, fascinated by her accent and the way she hummed while she worked. Lucy had been more cautious, watching Maria with careful eyes, testing her in small ways. The first real test came on a Tuesday morning when Lucy couldn't find her favorite socks. She'd been getting ready for school when she started crying, frustrated tears that had nothing to do with socks and everything to do with the fact that her mother had always known exactly where everything was. I can't find them anywhere, Lucy sobbed. Mom always knew where my socks were. Robert had frozen, unsure how to handle the outburst. But Maria had knelt down beside Lucy, her voice gentle but firm. I'm not your mom, and I won't try to be, she said. But I can help you look for your socks, and maybe we can come up with a better way to keep track of them. They'd spent 20 minutes searching the house together, finally finding the socks in Jake's toy box. Lucy had looked embarrassed, but Maria had just smiled and suggested they organize Lucy's dresser so everything would be easier to find. That afternoon, while the kids were at school, Maria had started making small changes around the house. Nothing dramatic, just little improvements that made daily life easier. She'd organized the kitchen cabinets so Robert could find things when he was packing lunches. She'd set up a system for the kids' homework and backpacks by the front door. She'd even started a vegetable garden in the backyard, planting seeds in the same spot where Robert's wife had once grown tomatoes. You don't have to do all this, Robert had told her one evening, as she mended a tear in Jake's favorite shirt. We agreed this was just a practical arrangement. Taking care of a family is practical, Maria had replied, not looking up from her sewing. Besides, I like staying busy. It keeps my mind off other things. Robert understood what she meant. They both had ghosts they were trying to outrun. Staying busy helped keep the painful memories at bay. The arrangement worked better than either of them had expected. Maria was naturally good with children, patient in ways that Robert had forgotten how to be. She helped Jake with his alphabet and listened to Lucy read her favorite books. She packed nutritious lunches and made sure their clothes were clean and mended. In return, Robert handled the heavy lifting around the house and took care of all the legal and financial matters. He'd helped Maria apply for permanent residency, a process that was much easier now that she was married to a U.S. citizen. He'd also helped her set up a small sewing business, putting up flyers around town advertising alterations and repairs. Word spread quickly in their small community. Mrs. Peterson from the grocery store brought in her husband's work pants to be hemmed. The pastor's wife had Maria alter her daughter's prom dress. Soon, Maria had a steady stream of customers, and the extra income was making a real difference in their lives. But the most surprising change was in Robert himself. Having Maria in the house had given him a reason to get up in the morning, a sense that he wasn't carrying the weight of everything alone. She didn't try to replace his wife's memory, but she filled the empty spaces with her own quiet presence. One evening, about 6 weeks after their courthouse wedding, Robert came home from work to find Maria teaching Lucy how to braid her hair. They were sitting on the living room floor. Maria was patiently showing Lucy how to weave the strands together while telling her a story about her grandmother in Mexico. My abuela used to braid my hair every morning before school, Maria was saying. She said a girl's hair was her crown, and a crown should always be beautiful. Lucy was concentrating hard, her tongue poking out slightly as she tried to copy Maria's movements. Like this? Perfecto? You're a natural. Jake was playing with his trucks nearby, making engine noises and crashing them into the coffee table. legs. The scene was so normal, so peaceful, that Robert had to stop and catch his breath. For the first time since his wife's death, his house felt like a home again. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, Robert and Maria sat on the front porch sharing a cup of tea and watching the stars. It had become their routine, this quiet time to talk about their day and plan for tomorrow. "Lucy asked me something today," Maria said, wrapping her sweater tighter around her shoulders. "She wanted to know if she could call me Mom." Robert's heart skipped. "What did you tell her?" "I told her she already had a mom, and that Mom would always be special. But if she wanted to call me Mama Maria, that would be okay." "What did she say?" Maria smiled. She said that sounded perfect because then she'd have two moms, one in heaven and one here with her. Robert felt his throat tighten with emotion. "She's a smart kid. They both are. You've done a good job with them, Robert, even when you think you haven't." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the countryside. Crickets chirping, an owl calling from the old oak tree, the distant sound of a train whistle. "Do you ever regret it?" Robert asked suddenly. "Marrying me, I mean? Giving up your chance at real love?" Maria was quiet for so long that Robert thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "I used to think love had to be like in movies, all passion and drama and grand gestures. But maybe there are different kinds of love. Maybe what we have is its own kind of real." Robert looked at her profile in the moonlight. This woman who had stumbled into his life and somehow made everything better without even trying. "Maybe it is," he said quietly, and for the first time in 2 years, he allowed himself to hope that the best parts of his life weren't behind him after all.